I introduced you before the ASU football game.
Oh, right. Okay.
so,
That
I do the
time was a
public
bit of a
address for
blur.
I do the public address for Arizona State football. So introduced you, and then your competition did the
Yep.
coin toss. That
Yep.
was interesting. Play it fair.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, you did a nice job.
Thank you.
We good? Okay. On Arizona News Radio, happy to be joined in studio by United States Senator Martha McSally. Thank you for joining us here at Arizona News Radio today.
Absolutely. It's always good to be back in Arizona. Thanks for having me
We're
on.
talking to many of your constituents across the state today. How has the transition gone since you have been in the United States Senate, coming over from the House? They call the Senate the more deliberative body. Have you found it to be that way, or has it been prone with a big learning curve?
Well, I actually was a legislative fellow for Senator John Kyle when I was an Air Force major back in 99 to 2000. So I had a little bit of an exposure to the Senate, although so many things have changed since then. I've flown back and across the country 30 times, came back last night. And, again, the Senate was designed to be more deliberative, as you said, but it's been pretty dysfunctional over the last several years. Unfortunately, the Democrats have kind of weaponized some of the procedures where any senator can hold something up, or they can kind of extend the timeline of debate, even on very non-controversial nomination confirmations. And so that part obviously is a little frustrating, but I'm really honored to be there representing Arizona. I'm on 5 committees: the Armed Services Committee, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. I chair the Water and Power Subcommittee on that, the Indian Affairs Committee, the Banking and Housing Committee, and the Select Committee on Aging. So a lot of this is really important work for the people that I represent in Arizona, and we've already gotten some good legislation passed: the Drought Contingency Plan, some land exchange packages, and I'm happy to get into any details on any of that.
Well, and also, obviously, you've made some headlines in terms of talking about your own experiences and how you would like to see things changed in the military when it comes to sexual assault, and you actually introduced a new bill this week. How has that been received? I know that many people were taken by your story, surprised by your story, but also questioning the involvement of the military commanders in the process, and you want to keep them in the wheel.
I do.
But at the same time, some people are saying they're part of the problem.
Well, I served 26 years in the military, and I had the honor to be a commander myself. I didn't quite get the magnitude of the mantle you have on you as a commander until I was a commander, and the responsibilities are like none other in civilian society. I mean, we're responsible for sending men and women into harm's way, for directing them to take lives. The good order and discipline, the climate, the teamwork, everything that's about what makes the unit work to defend America is all the commander's responsibility. So if you want to make sure that we stop sexual assault from happening in our military, the commanders need to be more involved, more accountable, more equipped as well. And so I did, share. I very strongly believe, not lightly, that commanders need to retain that responsibility. Other people want to strip it away from them into some specialized group of a new bureaucratic group of, judge advocates and lawyers. But I also shared that my perspective comes from being a survivor of military sexual assault, and I felt that was important for people to understand how deeply I feel, and based on my experiences, the totality of my experiences. But the status quo is not an option. So my legislation this week, I asked the Pentagon to take a deep dive into what's not working still from the time a sexual assault is reported until the time the judicial process is over. Because the other people want to strip commander of the final kind of decision, go to court-martial or not. But there's a lot of things that happen in the time frame before that package gets to the commander that still need improvement. These are difficult cases to prove in a court of law anyway, in civilian or military. But there's some initiatives in our legislation that, for instance, gives investigators better digital forensics capabilities. In the 21st century, a lot of the acquaintance rapes that happen, which is 85% in the military, a lot of the context of what's happening before and after comes in our digital lives from the perpetrator and potentially the victim that can strengthen those cases. So my legislation provides some increased capacity for them to make sure they can have the best and most thorough and most timely investigations possible so that we can have the best justice served while protecting due process for the accused.
How has it been received in terms of, because this is an uncomfortable subject, obviously, for a lot of people. I think there was an unwritten kind of a acknowledgement that this was going on, but it
Yeah.
hadn't been talked about as openly until you went before the committee.
Well, I entered basic training in 1984, and we definitely didn't. This wasn't talked about at all. But over the last several years, there has been an increased awareness and commitment from military leaders up and down the chain of command to tackle the issue. But I think some people are well-intended, but still a little naive as to what sexual assault looks like, what types of people are perpetrators, what types of people are survivors. And so I felt that it was important as a leader to kind of share that, hey, like, I'm a survivor too. And that shocked a lot of people, I think, who are, again, just maybe misinformed or naive. But the response has been very strong. I was sitting around a table last week with the acting Secretary of Defense on my right, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on my left, all the military service secretaries and chiefs, and members of this task force that I asked them to create to dive into this issue. And in a fast and innovative way, which is not usually associated with the Pentagon, they came back with recommendations that have formed the basis of our legislation. But think about that. I mean, what an opportunity I have to lead on the issue by chairing a group of people like that to solve this really important issue.
Military intelligence, so to speak,
Yeah.
is quite valuable on Capitol Hill. I know that you've been fighting for the to keep the A-10 Warthog still up in the air. That was
Yep.
your plane, right?
Yes,
And,
the Warthog is an amazing plane. I flew it. I commanded an A-10 squadron from Davis-Monthan in Afghanistan. It's like no other capability, and we got to keep it flying. We also need the F-35. China and Russia are closing the capability gap, and our airmen have made air superiority look easy for a long time. So we need the F-35 and we need the A-10 to make sure we can save American lives.
And they need to be updated and improved
Yes.
and so forth, because that's the problem. I guess that's a conundrum, is it's very expensive to keep them updated and keep them to where they are still as competitive, so to speak, as they need to be.
Well, we have a lot of old airplanes in our inventory. The A-10 is actually one of the younger fourth generation planes. But in order to keep it flying, we need to re-strengthen, re-wing the airplanes just from a structural point of view so they can continue to fly longer hours. And a good amount of the fleet actually had new wings before the last administration tried to get rid of the A-10 altogether. I sprung into action my first year in the House to stop that from happening and led that fight. Senator McCain led it in the Senate as the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. We were successful, and now the A-10 is going to fly for a long time. But the resources we've invested over the last few years are to re-strengthen and re-wing the remaining fleet so that it can continue to fly well into the 2030s.
Let's talk about immigration.
Yeah.
This is an issue, obviously, that affects us here in Arizona as a border state. A lot of people have been paying very close attention to the next development, so to speak. The president came out with a new proposal this week that he calls merit-based, bold, and beautiful. And the Democrats call it a non-starter because it doesn't address the Dreamer issue. Even conservative Republicans are saying that this is probably not going anywhere, that it's maybe a starter, but it doesn't have much chance of getting out of the starting gate. What needs to happen to get this moving forward when everyone acknowledges that it's an emergency
Sure.
situation?
There's a couple of elements to our immigration situation and border security. And so what the president was addressing this week is what needs to be done in border security, which he has long talked about, which includes investments in infrastructure and personnel and intelligence-driven operations, and closing the loopholes that right now are incentivizing the illegal activity. I actually introduced legislation this week with Lindsey Graham that's just focused on these loopholes that basically they now know, the word's on the street, that if you show up with a kid, you're going to be let go and released into the interior of the United States, and they're recycling kids. So we got to close these loopholes so that people go through due process, but if they have a false asylum claim, they're sent back. So that's one element of it. I was over at the White House last week, pre-briefed on the president's plan related to modernizing our legal immigration system. That's what he rolled out yesterday, to be more like Canada and Australia, so that we can better compete with the world's talent. And it's about growing our economy. Everywhere I go in Arizona, people are held back. We got such a strong economy right now, but businesses are being held back by lack of workers. And that includes science and technology, PhD graduates from our world-class universities. We should be stapling green cards to their diplomas. But it also is in the area of tradecraft, high-tech manufacturing. So we need a smart 21st century immigration system. DACA is certainly a part of the conversation. I led on legislation in the House that we thought was narrow enough that addressed border security, the loopholes, modernizing the legal system, and DACA. In this case, the administration wants to focus on modernizing the legal system while not incentivizing more illegal activity. And I think in the conversation, many of us have shown, myself, including the president, that we're willing to do something on DACA, for sure, but we've got to address why we have a DACA population in the first place. Because right now, because of these loopholes, the next generation of DACA-like people are coming across the border every single day. Hundreds of thousands of minors since 2012, which is when DACA stopped, because of these loopholes, are already here in America. So we'll be having the same conversation in another 5 or 10 years about a similar population. So let's address the root causes of what's incentivizing the illegal activity, and be willing to negotiate, I am anyway, something that relates to that doesn't incentivize more illegal activity.
Is that realistic? Because we know that the clock is ticking.
Washington, D.C. is a crazy place. I'll tell you, it's so frustrating because I ground myself in governing and solving problems and making decisions based on facts. This is not complicated, but for some people, I think it's politically difficult. You see, for whatever reason, on the left, they want to just sort of, I think, string the DACA issue out there and use it more for political purposes instead of actually solving it. We've had some really generous offers and negotiations to address the issue, but they've walked away from them in the past. I think we need to keep putting pressure on them. I think the American people, Arizona, we know this, their border crisis is very real. Yuma declared an emergency. People are being released into the streets because Border Patrol is overwhelmed and can't process them in time. And it's got to stop. And so we just got to keep putting pressure on the other side to stop playing politics with this. It's not a game. We know what's going to solve it. Let's sit down and figure it out and vote on it.
What would you say to a dreamer who may be listening today and is listening to your explanation and is still frustrated by the fact that they don't see anything happening?
I appreciate that they were brought into this country of no fault of their own. And many of them are thriving and trying to meet their full potential. But we do have to address the root issues of the future incentivization of illegal activity so that other young people are not put into the same situation that they were in. Look at my record. Don't look at the, rhetoric. I have been willing to lead on solving the DACA issue, but it can't be by itself. It has to be a part of something, doesn't have to be large, but it has to be a part of addressing the root causes and stopping the incentives to come here illegally.
Let's talk about Iran real quick.
Yeah.
The situation seems to be escalating, but members of Congress have been saying that they're not really in the loop. They don't have the information they need to figure out where we are in this crisis, if it is a crisis at the moment. What do you know? Have you been given the information you think you need to form an opinion on this?
Yeah, the information has been made available. I did sit down and read all of it yesterday in the classified binder, and we are going to get a briefing, all senators, on Tuesday related to the issue. I can only say at the unclassified level that we always have threats from Iran. Their maligned activity through the IRGC, the Republican Guard Corps, and Hezbollah, Hamas, other militias. I mean, it's always been a threat that's out there, but when we start to see a pattern of what appears to be a more specific and credible threat to Americans in the region and other national interests that we have, we have to take that seriously. So, and the military, in many cases, I've dealt with situations like this before where we look at what's the right thing to do for when we evacuate non-essential personnel from the embassy, like they've done, and what else can we do along the spectrum of how to respond and deter and de-escalate using diplomatic, economic, and preparedness, military-wise, to address the threat. Nobody wants to go to war. Nobody wants to go to war with Iran. I don't think this rhetoric is really helpful, but the military is responsible for providing courses of action to decision makers as to how we protect Americans in the region and how we might respond should there be an attack that happens. And that's the military's responsibility. So this is very serious. It is, again, of deep concern for me based on the indications that we have of what's going on with Iran. And I hope that they will think clearly about their decision-making of whether they're going to attack Americans in the region, because we can't tolerate that.
And what about us in terms of, would there ever be a preemptive strike? Would you ever see something if you thought that?
Every circumstance is different depending on what the threat is and what the intelligence is. Iran has spent a lot of resources, much of which was the relief from the bad Iran deal that they put into continuing to build their military for missile capabilities, mining capabilities, the Straits of Hormuz, which is a strategic area. A couple ships, civilian ships, have been attacked. They haven't specifically identified it came from Iran. They're working on that investigation, but they do have a lot of sophisticated capabilities, unlike other places in the region that we have engaged. And so we have to be very mindful of that, the threat to our forces. What sort of military objectives are you actually trying to achieve? How do you not ensure that it escalates out of control? So, the decision makers have all this understanding. I just have it from being a part of these planning efforts in the past. But it's a very dangerous situation, and we need to figure out how to de-escalate it, not escalate it, and deter any military action by Iran.
Congress is a deliberative body. The administration is a deliberative body.
Yeah.
We've been hearing these reports that they're not necessarily all on the same page. That could be part of the deliberative process in the White House, but does it concern you as someone who's obviously watching and listening to the information coming out of there that there may not be a consensus?
We each have our roles, and as we've seen in the past, sometimes people can look at intelligence in different ways, and ultimately the president is responsible for keeping Americans safe and America safe. He does have a variety of advisors around him from all the different elements of our security apparatus. Congress certainly has a consultative role, and we're in the middle of that. We're just doing it in front of everybody right now, and we'll be getting the leaders of the Senate and the House did get briefed last week. We all had the opportunity to read the extensive intelligence and analysis, which I did. And next week we'll have a further conversation on Tuesday about it. And so that's again, much of this is classified to protect sources and methods, but that's the deliberative process that we need to go through, while the administration has to, ultimately be responsible for keeping Americans safe.
Before you arrived, Missouri legislature passed an abortion bill that restricts abortions after 8 weeks, I believe. Georgia, 6 weeks. Alabama, virtually non-existent now. You have been on record in the past as being a pro-life lawmaker, but with the exception of rape, incest, and the life of the mother.
Yep.
Do you maintain that as the Alabama law, as Congressman McCarthy has stated, maybe a little too strong?
I am pro-life, but I've always had those three exceptions of rape, incest, and life of the mother. And as someone who has recently shared that I'm a survivor of rape, it's, that element of it is quite personal, and I have deep empathy for those who have been through that. So, at the federal level, we have voted on, for example, 20-week abortion bans and supporting the Hyde Amendment, which doesn't allow federal funding for abortion, but it always has those three exceptions. So I feel very strongly about those three exceptions, while I feel strongly about the sanctity of life. These things are state-level actions that'll work their way through the courts, but I believe any initiative needs to have exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother.
Even Pat Robertson has said that
Yes.
maybe this is not the version of the law that we want to go before the Supreme Court, because you might get one bite of the apple and that would be struck down.
Yeah, those exceptions are really important.
In terms of looking ahead to next year,
Yeah.
You had kind of a circuitous route to the U.S.
I
Senate.
did. Story of my life. I haven't taken the traditional route to anything.
So you end up losing a very close election,
Yeah.
then being appointed to fill the next couple of years of Senator McCain's seat, but have to run again for the remainder of the term next year. It's been busy. It's been tough. Do you have a tough time staking out a claim to your seat and getting achieved what you want to achieve in the short time that you know for sure you're going to be there, while still keeping an eye toward next November and next August, for that matter?
Look, I didn't expect to be doing this. I'm not a career politician, even being in the House. It's just part of our culture as veterans that if we're complaining about something, we better be willing to step up and do something about it. And that's why I first ran for Congress. But I had a very difficult path, in the House. But my job, the view I take is my job is to be a good senator right now. I'm grateful to be here. Very few people have had an opportunity to serve in the United States Senate. And just like in the House, I went from winning by 167 votes in 2014 after a 43-day recount to winning by 44,000 votes 2 years later. And it was because I did a good job as a representative. And so that's my focus right now. I get the opportunity to serve. I get the opportunity to make a difference for Arizonans. We already have with getting the drought contingency plan signed into law, local land exchanges, support to our military base. We got to get the U.S. MCA passed, which would really be a big difference for us. There's plenty of other things that we can be doing for the people that I represent, and they get the opportunity to see me as a senator, and I'm honored to be in this position, and we'll focus on the campaign next year.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think, a high-profile campaign with two high-profile candidates, an incumbent, and the irony being, obviously, that you are serving a district once served by Gabrielle Giffords, and now you likely will be running against her husband. You're going to just basically look at the August and November stretch, or is it going to be?
Yeah, I look at it like I think people are tired of politicians who all they do when they get there is try to figure out how to perpetuate staying there. That's one reason why I ran in the first place. I see this as a continuation of my service, just in civilian clothes, the same exact oath of office I took as a military officer. And I also, when I was a kid, I lost my dad I was 12 and he was 49 years old. So everything I frame in life is looking at like treating each day as a gift and an opportunity to make a difference. So what can I do in these next 2 years to make a difference for the people that I represent, as opposed to spending all your time and energy trying to figure out how you're going to win a campaign. Like, we'll leave that to the experts, and there'll be a fight next fall related to that. But I think now the best thing I can do is serve Arizona well, listen to Arizonans, make a difference for the things that matter to them in a very dysfunctional Washington, D.C., speak truth to power, and have some breakthroughs that actually are the top things that Arizonans care about. And so that's what I'm focused on, and then hopefully I'll be given the opportunity to continue to serve.
You've been a very strong supporter of President Trump. He's been a strong supporter of you. A little inside baseball, you indicated that he was trying to reach you on the phone just while you were on the way
Yes.
here. Theoretically, and this is way out of left field, but theoretically, if he ever came to you and wanted you to be part of his administration as opposed to serve in the Senate, would you ever even
I don't
take the phone call?
I don't think about theoretic. I mean, I'll take any phone call, but right now my call to duty, my deployment is to the United States Senate. That's my focus. And look, I mean, when I disagree with him, which I have on many occasions, I mean, I let him know. We have a very candid relationship where from the very first meeting I had with him, where I just decided to talk to him like a fighter pilot, not a politician, just to speak plainly and candidly to him. I let him know to his face when I disagree with him, and I'm not a rubber stamp. When it's good for Arizona, then you'll have me make a thoughtful process, and whatever my vote is or my stance on an issue, it's going to be about what's good for Arizona. Right now, the economy is doing great. Passing the tax law and rolling back regulations. What's going on at the border is something that's very impactful. Support to our military and veterans. So there's plenty of areas where we have agreement. We've had disagreements too, and you'll see them play out in my votes and in my statements on things when appropriate. But I have a lot of also private conversations with them. You don't have to do everything out loud like some people do.
Did those discussions ever involve behavior? Tweets, anything like that?
I don't want to get into the details.
When you call him Donald instead of Mr. President?
No, I don't do that. I respect the office, and I don't ever do that. But I for example, I did call him the last time he was recently attacking Senator John McCain, and spoke to him about that. So, for example, I don't want to again get into the details of our conversations, because I think too many people spend time talking about things, out loud that are really important conversations, related to things that really matter to us here in Arizona. So I want to be able to protect the opportunity to speak to him like that, and not have me talk about it on a radio show 10 minutes later.
I do think people would be interested to hear if he is receptive, if he listens, or if he is combative or defensive or what have you, because there is obviously most people who've known him for many years say there is a side that we don't see.
Well, I have found that he's been receptive to me for sure. I mean, but he doesn't always do exactly what I'd hoped he would do. I mean, he's his own person, right? But he certainly listens, and the topics that we had today, he certainly listened, and we're going to follow up on a few things. And for example, my first conversation I had with him, we were in the Oval Office to talk about health care, and as I introduced myself, I said I'm the only female veteran in the GOP in the House, and he said, "Really? What did you do?" So I ended up talking to him about the A-10 Warthog, and in that conversation, because of the way I spoke to him and described it and advocated for it. Like, I got his support for the A-10 Warthog. And in fact, the conversation we just had, he brings up the airplane, he brought it up again. What a great plane, glad we keep flying it. So, he's listened on a number of topics, but he also listens, takes into consideration, and then makes his own decisions. That's the way it goes.
How does he view Arizona? Because really, Arizona is where one of his first big rallies took place.
Yeah.
He made several trips here. He campaigned on your behalf here, and it's definitely one of those states where I think he looks at it a little more fondly than maybe some of the other states.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to ask him, but I'm sure he's gonna be here over the next year and a half, and he's certainly, again, when I advocate on behalf of Arizonans. Some of the things we just talked about generally were the impact of trade and impact of other things that were happening. He understands how important that is. When I advocate and say, this is like really important, we got to get this through this USMCA, for example, and get this finalized. And they're working through steel and aluminum tariff issue with Mexico and Canada as a part of that. He hears me, and I think he really, I will say on that case, understands the impact that makes, not just for other states, but for Arizona.
Biggest issue facing Arizona? We talked about immigration, but of the others that you mentioned right off the top that you're involved in, where do you see the biggest challenges?
So the border issues are certainly top of mind for a lot of people. The economy and jobs are top of mind for people, and our economy is doing great, but businesses are challenged trying to find a workforce. So we've got to do more on the workforce element. Also, there's the issue of healthcare. And it's not just health insurance, which is what we've talked about a lot, but the underlying cost of healthcare, reducing out-of-pocket costs of healthcare. Everywhere I went on my 15-county tour, people are talking about the concerns they have for their family members, their small business, about being able to get access. Seniors, being able to afford their prescription drugs. So we really need to knuckle down, I think. It's a complex topic. Figuring out how to have some breakthroughs in innovation and breakthroughs in technology and in removing barriers so that we can drive down the cost, have more transparency and better health outcomes for the people that I represent. And so that's going to be it is something that we're focusing on and will continue to.
Any singing in your repertoire?
Yeah, but we sing often. So we'll do the national anthem a lot. I don't think there's anything on my schedule in the next few days. But
Senator, we hope you'll come back and visit us
all
again.
right.
We appreciate the visit.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. More on Arizona News Radio after this. Very good.
Thanks.
Outstanding.
All right. Appreciate it.